Welcome back to V8 Creative and the next episode of the Ultima RS build, and on this episode we're focusing on brakes. Welcome back to the Dean Den, and before I start this episode, what I want to do is say thank you to everyone who's subscribing, and also those of you that are watching longer and longer and longer. So as long as you keep watching and liking, I'll continue to produce content. And on this week, it's going to be a great week because we're going to be fitting those amazing AP racing brakes. That are those huge discs and absolutely gargantuan calipers finished in bright gloss red. So all there's left to do is let's just open some boxes. Look at this. Now, as I explained, I think it was in the first episode of this series where I specified this car, I've gone all out and gone for the big upgrade on the brakes. Now, the standard brakes you get, I believe it's in pack A, I'm sure it is, are pretty monstrous anyway. AP racing again, 4-pot calipers, front and rear, large discs, ventilated, but these are the big boys. Now, what we have is we have huge, and I mean huge, I'll show you them in a minute, discs, and then in here, amazing 6-pot calipers. And I'll explain to you what all this means as I open these lovely boxes. So to start with, what should we do? Should we do discs first? Yeah, let's do the discs. Okay, let's push this out the way. And let's just pop this box open. So in here are 2 discs, actually one's not in here, I've got it over there, but let's lift one of these bad boys out. Oh, look at that. Oh, that is so cool. Now, I'm getting rather excited about these because when I grew up as a boy, when I used to see supercars, I used to count the number of exhausts to see how fast it went, and also look how big the brakes are, because this is what truly is the measure of a hypercar. So let's just pop this to one side to get the box out of the way, and let's unwrap. Now these are clearly labelled, left hand side of the car, and I'll explain why these discs are sided in a minute. So we'll take off, just look at this. Look at that. Now, it's probably quite difficult to tell the physical size of these things on camera, but take my word for it, they are huge.
Live your life within the moment.
Now, the design of these rotors, as you call them in America, or disc brakes, what we call them over here, is basically we have grooves in the surface. And what these are for, these are basically to provide scraping for the pads and also provide an area if there's any gases building up or any fine dust that they can be blown out of these grooves as you're on full-on braking. The negative about having these grooves is they do increase pad wear, but who cares? You just want to stop quickly. The discs are also what we call ventilated. So unlike a lot of standard discs that are just a solid plate, this is solid plate, and they're joined by casting, they're in a casting, and these are like curved vanes. And the reason this is done is when these are rotating, and this is why these discs are handed, what happens is it's almost like an air pump. And what happens is air is drawn in from this side of the disc and then expelled out the back. So there is a high flow of air over these two surfaces. And what that does is cool the disc. And that's what you need, because you don't want discs getting too hot. It's not like Formula One where they want to be glowing red, because you need them operating with the pads at an ideal temperature. Otherwise you could get brake fade, otherwise heat could go in the calipers, which could then boil the brake fluid, that would then give you a soft pedal. Anyway, I won't go on. What you'll also notice is these are two-piece discs. You have a centerpiece which is called a bell, and this is made from high strength aluminium, and then you have basically the disc bolted with all these bolts around it. Now the reason you do this basically is to reduce the unsprung weight of the car, because having this made of aluminium reduces the weight of these by, well, probably about half a kilogram. I don't know exactly. If it was all steel, probably more than that, probably 750 grams. And the thing is, unsprung weight is your enemy. And I'll explain that later when I'm fitting the discs and calipers onto the car. So there they are. God, that's a lovely bit of kit, that. Oh, I could just look at that all day. And of course, AP Racing. Now, AP Racing have been known, well, they do supply all the Formula One teams with their braking systems. They supply rally teams, high performance cars, the works. So premium brand for a premium make of car. Next, we have Caliper Box. So let's see what's in here. I've already had a peek, you can tell I've cut the tape. Now what lovely packaging. Just look at that, just look at that. So here we have two bottles of DOT 5.1 brake fluid. We also have here, these are the caliper mounting brackets that bolt onto the upright of the Ultima, and then the caliper bolts onto these. Beautifully cast, lovely. There's two of those, of course. And then also we have here the brake pads. I'll open those in a sec. Oh, you can't see what I'm putting out, can you? There you go, there's 1, 2, 1, 2, like that. Let's move this out of the way. Then what else have we got in here? Bolts of the correct tensile strength. We then have washers and nuts. And the pads. Here we have one set for each caliper. So we have pins which hold the pads into the calipers, and we also have these plates here that stop the pads rattling. And you have to be very careful when you put these in, but I will show you that when we do the installation. And then, of course, we have Loctite, because the instruction says we have to make sure a lot of these bolts are Loctited, because much like the steering we assembled, you don't want this coming loose. Now we get into the good boxes. Now clearly there are two calipers, so I'm just going to unwrap one here. Let's put these down here. So we have a box within a box, and Ultima are lovely. They actually label which ones, because again, these are handed. They have to be fitted exactly the right way. And again, I will show you that when we do the fitting. So if we open this up, look at this. Let's just put that over there. Just look at that. So this is a forged 6-piston caliper. As you can see, Ultima branded, finished in heat resistant paint. And when these are bolted to the car, basically, this bleed nipple has to be at the top. Also, if we look, you can see his 3 pistons this side and 3 pistons this side. And interestingly, what you'll see is there's a small piston first, then medium, then large. And the reason why this is done is this is to even out brake wear when on the brake pads when you're braking. Now, interestingly, I've got another couple of calipers over here. Should we do a bit of a comparison? So here, you can tell what this is off. I just bought it on eBay. It's brand new. I thought I'd have that. So it's a Mclaren Caliper. I don't know what it's off. If you guys out there know, just tell me. And this is a 4-piston caliper. So you can see here that the casting is about the same size, but this would provide considerably more braking force. Now, I've got another caliper over here. And again, you can see what make of car this is off. And again, if you can see, this is a 6-piston caliper, 3 either side. So if this sort of braking performance is good enough for these sort of marks, it's good enough for Ultima. I mean, come on, this thing is gonna stop on a dime.
Live your life within the moment, and don't go wait until the morning. You never know when it is over. All that I know is we'll get older. So let us dance this night away.
We're ready to fit the brakes. I've been dreaming about this moment ever since I ticked that box for the big brake upgrade. Now we're going to start in the front left-hand corner, and for this type of job it's worth being very organized. So what I've done is I've laid out here all the tools I require, also all the components that you saw me placing out, ensuring I have the correct left side front components to do the assembly. In addition, there's a couple of consumables I need. I need Loctite, which is supplied by AP Racing with their brakes, and also, which I had to go to Halfords for, or was it, I don't know, Amazon maybe, some copper slip, copper grease, you can call it what you want, and this is just to ensure that disc doesn't weld itself to this hub, but I'll explain more about that in a moment. So the first thing we're going to do is bolt this beautiful piece of aluminium onto this upright. So if we get one of these bolts, now the art is with Loctite is you only need to put a small amount on. You don't need to go mad. It will do its job. Just needs to be a little bit. And what it will do is it will run down those threads and lock this. It will never move. I promise you it will never move. In addition, the nuts that are supplied are actually locking nuts. And they don't use a nylock because you wouldn't want nylocks around this assembly here, because if a lot of heat is created by the caliper under heavy braking, those nylock inserts can mount. So therefore, these are special nuts that you often see used on exhaust manifolds, for example. So we pop on the supplied washer, of course, and then spin up that nut. And then we repeat the same for the bottom bolt. On goes the Loctite. Sorry if my head's in the way. And it goes through. Again, washer. And nut. Now what you do with these nuts, when you spin them up, you'll feel them going up fine. And then when they get to the end, they just get hard. And that's because the thread is slightly, well, it's not distorted, but it's changed in a way whereby it bites once you go past that point. Now, let me get the wrench, and then what I'm going to do is tighten these up before I get my torque wrench out. Whoops. Oh, I just love this spannering. Now, as with a lot of these bolts, to do with the steering, the suspension, and with the braking, Ultima provide all the torque settings here. And mounting block to upright It's an M10 times 1.5, that's the bolt, and it's got to be 58 Newton meters or 43 foot-pounds of torque. So let me get my trusty torque wrench and set that up. That's fine. I'm gonna have to stand up for this. They're not murder tight, but they're tight enough, clearly. And there we have it. Isn't that nice and satisfying? 4 washers, 2 bolts, 2 nuts, and it's done. So next, we're gonna put those amazing discs on. Well, 1 disc actually. And if you look at this hub assembly, you can see here, I've left this bare steel. I've sprayed the back, but I've left this bare steel. And you do that because if you have 2 mounting surfaces, you don't want paint to be between them. Because if that paint starts to degrade, the actual contact between those two can technically loosen slightly. So what you've got to do is ensure that this exposed metal surface doesn't rust and weld itself onto those aluminium hubs. Because I know it's not steel against steel, but steel against aluminium is not good. They'll actually bind and get stuck together. So what you do on this surface, we apply copper slip. Now anyone that's installed brakes on any sort of car knows this stuff is great. So what we do is just put on a little bit, not masses, just a little bit. I'll spread it out in a minute. So we do it on this plain surface, and then also on this center section here, that is where the center of the disc slides over, and that can be really tight. So that's just, I'm not wiping this off, I'm just distributing it so there's not just, you know, getting some on the threads, that's absolutely fine. You don't want loads, but there we go. There we go. So the whole surface is covered now, and just me being me, I just want to make sure I don't have any on that painted surface because I just don't like it. I must say, this stuff isn't as revolting as the grease used on the bushing. Okay, so there we have it, all ready for the disc to be installed. Now, if I lift this up and I offer this onto the hub, there we go. And you can see how tight it is, because if you slightly get it off skew, it will lock on that center ring. So what we're going to do is just tap it on, and then get some of the wheel nuts, 3 will do. And you can add spacers to leaves if needed, and actually pull this disc down onto the hub. Now you have to do this with an even amount of pressure. And also make sure that those nuts aren't off in the bottom. And there we go. There she is. Beautiful. And next, what we're going to do is put the pads in the caliper and then put the caliper and pads together onto the mounting bracket. And then we're practically done. It's pretty straightforward, really. Anyway, let's go over to the bench. It's far easier to fit the pads before the caliper goes on to the car. So what we see here, we have the caliper assembly itself, 2 pads, also a spring retention clip, and what this does is stops those pads from rattling when there is no brake pressure being applied. And then also we have 2 pins which go through the entire assembly and hold in place the pads into the caliper. So the first stage is to drop this anti-vibration bracket into the bottom of the caliper. And then with the friction material facing inwards, believe it or not, it's easy to get it wrong, just drop both of them in. There's only one way they can go. And you can now see that this is where the disc will sit in between these two mating surfaces. Now, if we get one of these pins, if you look at the pins, you can see on the end, we have this little metal, I don't know what you call it, like a spring really. And what this does, when this pin is pushed all the way through, what it will do is then fit inside the caliper housing and stop this from falling out in the future. So if we lift this up, you can see here's the hole here. So if we push the pad down, there we go, it's gone through that pad now, as you can see. It's a bit difficult to do this. Then if we push the other pad down, and the reason we got to push them down is it's the spring trying to push the pads upwards, so there is some pressure on this spring. So let's do the other one now. So push this down, you can see it moving, pin in the hole, it's gone through. It's gone through the first pad. Then put pressure on both and slide the pin in. And there we go. Now if we lift this up, we can see the pins now are not all the way home. And the reason why that is I'll actually do that once the caliper is on the car, because it's far easier to do it. But what you can see here is the anti-rattle clip here, and you can see it's applying pressure on the back of the two pads. And then also here are the pins. And when these are knocked in, they'll knock in home in these two holes here. So I think the next thing to do is fit this to the car. This is like the icing on the cake. So the caliper itself, if you see here, has two holes. And what happens is these two rather large bolts go through these holes, and then what they do is they seat home in the threaded holes in here. And of course, we need Loctite for this. So again, we pop a bit of Loctite on both of these. One, two. I'm just going to have to reposition now because I don't want to drop this caliper. So what we do is we offer the caliper up to the disc. Get one of these bolts. And thread through. Okay, caliper to mounting block is again 43 foot-pounds of torque, so that's the same as the caliper mounting bracket to the upright. So there we go. Again, not murder tight, because of course we are going into aluminium. And there we go. Look at those puppies. Wow, look at that. Aren't they beautiful? I get very excited about things like this, but so making sure things are put on the right side of the car. Bleed nipple upwards, correct. Also these vanes going backwards, and also, funny enough, AP racing part numbers, if it's an odd number, it's on the left of the car. If it's an even number, it's on the right of the car. So, there we go. So as we can see here, the pin is still protruding. You can still see that one. That one's a bit out of focus. So we're going to focus on this one first. So I've tapped it in as far as it will go, and now we're going to use a punch and a hammer to send it home. like so. And you keep on hitting until you can feel it actually hitting home. Okay, let's do the bottom one now. Let's refocus. So there we have it, front left-hand corner done. Oh, isn't it beautiful? So we have the disc, caliper, pads, and caliper mounting bracket all installed, all torqued, pads correctly located in the caliper, all complete. And doesn't that look great? Now what we're going to do now is we're going to be moving on to the back of the car, because I'm not going to show you the right hand side of the car because it's exactly the same, it's just mirrored, that's all. But the rear of the car is slightly more involved because it not only has a caliper here, but it also has an additional caliper for the handbrake. And I'll explain why you need two calipers on high performance cars like this. Anyway, let's see what components are needed for the rear end.
Live your life within the moment, and don't go wait until the morning. You never know when it is over. All that I know is we'll get older. So let us dance this night away.
So now we're ready to go spannering on the back end of the RS. But before I install all that braking system on the rear left-hand corner, I want to explain one thing about the braking system on supercars of this type. What you'll have seen is there are, at the rear of the car, on each side, there are two calipers. Unlike the front, where it's just one. Now obviously the large red caliper, that's the main braking for the vehicle. But the additional caliper, which I have here, this is purely for the handbrake. And what you can see is you've got two small pads and you have this lever here which connects to the cable, which connects to the handbrake lever or the park lever, whatever you want to call it, inside the cabin. Now, why do you need two? It's extra weight, it's extra cost. And the reason is very simple. On most production cars, what you'll find at the rear is just one caliper. And that's assuming disc brakes are fitted, because obviously some cars have drum brakes where you don't have a caliper, you just have two brake pads inside a drum which are pushed out by two pistons. Now, those designs, which use one caliper for both types of braking, is what's known as a sliding caliper design. And what that is basically you have one side of the caliper that actually moves, it actually floats. And then you have one piston which, when it is drawn into the disc, the floating caliper pulls the other brake pad into the other side of the disc. I'll put a little diagram up here so you can understand that. Now with that sort of design, what you can do is you can actually integrate the handbrake mechanism into that assembly. Because what it is a mechanical override of the hydraulic system, which basically pushes that same piston in. Now, when you go to a multi-piston brake design, that's not possible because the caliper suddenly is a fixed caliper. It has multiple pistons and you can't integrate that handbrake into that assembly. So what happens is you need two calipers per side. Yep, it's additional weight. Yep, it's additional cost. However, it is worth that sacrifice to provide that increased braking which you need for supercars of this type. Well, I hope that makes sense, and what we're going to do now is we're going to fit those rear brakes. Rear brakes. First step of the assembly, attaching the caliper bracket to the upright, and that's for the main braking caliper. Again, as with the front, what we do is we use Loctite on the threads and also these locking nuts to ensure nothing ain't gonna move. So now we have the main caliper bracket in place. What we're going to do now is bolt on the handbrake caliper bracket that goes on the back of the upright. And again, we're going to be using Loctite on socket head set screws that have been supplied in the kit, and there's also anti-vibration washers to add. And of course, we're going to torque them to the required torque. Now what I would say, when putting these set screws into this caliper bracket, care has to be taken not to over torque them, because this is aluminium. Okay, it's hard aluminium, it's billet aluminium, but it can still be stripped very easily if you over tighten these set screws. So now we have both caliper brackets in place. Next, what we do is we attach the disc. And as before, what we do is we put on copper slip on this surface to ensure that the disc doesn't weld itself to this hub over time.
So let us dance this night away.
Next, fitting the caliper. And obviously this goes on the front of the disc. I fitted the pads already, exactly the same process as I did for the front, so I'm not going to show you that again. And as with the front, I haven't quite hit these pins home yet, because it's far easier to do when it's bolted onto the car. So again, we're using these large bolts that have been supplied by Ultima and thread lock. So, or Loctite, whatever you want to call it. Oh, just look at that.
So let us dance this night away. Feel the air get thinner. I'm standing in a blurry dream. No one else can see us.
Perfect. Next, handbrake caliper. Now the pads are already mounted in this as they come from Ultima, so what you have to be careful here is there are two different size bolts. On the bottom mount, it's the longer bolt, and on the top mount, it's the shorter, smaller size one. Now these, the actual torque these are set up to are relatively low because it's going straight into a threaded aluminium bracket. And the thing is, apparently it's a common fault for people to strip these out. So make sure you follow the guidelines as regards torque. Again, washers are used, anti-vibration washers. And again, we use thread lock, Loctite.
All that I know is we'll get older, older. So let us dance this night away. Our bodies move. words. We get lost in the crowd, it's getting thicker.
And there we go, brake assembly complete. It's as simple as that. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave for the next episode connecting up the handbrake cables and also the hydraulic lines to the calipers, because that's quite a lot of spannering for this episode. Anyway, don't it look great? And there we have it, another episode complete, and boy, what an episode. I tell you what, fitting those brakes were amazing. Now, firstly, I do apologise as if in the last scenes, fitting the rear brakes, I was a bit lacklustre. I was recovering from COVID. Nasty business. But anyway, let's not worry about that. I just want to show you around the car with those amazing brakes. Really, it's just incredible. So, look, just look. Oh man, just aren't they amazing? Now, for those of you out there that think when I do work on the car, all my tools are perfectly organised, well, there you go. That's what my workspace looks like, which isn't too bad, I guess, but there you go. But I want to share something with you. Oops, come around here. I want to share something. Now, when I was doing the brakes, I just could not resist adding a wheel. I know it's for next episode when I do the suspension setup, but come this way. Come and look. Just look at this. Just look. Let me scan down. Oh, look at this. Look at that. Look at those brakes peeping out behind those wheels, or that wheel, sorry. And for those of you that know about the Ultima, the colour I've chosen for these forged wheels may give you an idea of the colour I've chosen for the bodywork. Well, it might not, but you're going to have to wait and see. And there we go, another episode complete in the Dean Den, and I'm feeling very happy with myself. Those discs, those calipers, and that wheel I sneaked on. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, I was going to do some Q&As like I did on the previous episode, but I'm afraid time is running out because I have to edit all this content to get it ready for that Friday release. Now, all I would ask you is, if you haven't subscribed, please do, because it helps my channel. And also, if you can do thumbs up, which a lot of you are anyway, that's brilliant. And if you can put notifications on, it will make sure you will not miss those episodes when I put them up on those Friday evenings. So, next week, should be on the ground, we'll be setting up the suspension. And until then, happy spannering, and remember, creativity is intelligence having fun.